let Doug take it away with his presentation focused on environmental, social, and governance, ESG.
Thank you, Janice, and thank you everybody at the IIA Los Angeles chapter for this forum on this very important topic. And I have to thank everybody for doing just a heroic effort on this conference and this chapter in this challenging time, and especially to the people who have facilitated this technology. We got some good pointers in the last session. I'm going to try to use a couple of them on this session. And thank you for helping to make all of this work. My objectives for today are to convince the internal audit function that ESG should be part of your effort on an ongoing basis. And we're going to do that through the 4 agenda topics listed there on the screen. So every time you come online, there's that little click button and accept to proceed. So here's a standard disclaimer you often see, and I see everybody's clicked the button to accept. So we'll go right on to an introduction to ESG. You may have heard the term sustainability many times over the years. They're more or less the same thing. ESG has become, I think, a preferred term in many corners of the investment world in particular. So what is ESG? ESG consists of environmental, social, and governance as summarized here. ESG performance and reporting is often expected or even demanded by a wide range of stakeholders. So with that, we're just going to jump right into a polling question and ask folks to say, I think this is a free text response. So we'll see what comes up here. It's not multiple guess. What ESG topic is most important to your organization, or most important to you, or has come across your desk within the last 90 days, or attracts your money as an investment? So I'm going to look here and see how the answers come in. And it looks like, enter my own term, I'm going to see.
Largely social issues, Doug. Practices.
Okay. And I like it when on the screen all the words appear and they change, and maybe we'll get this graphic to see as part of handouts after the conference. But social issues, what else do you see, Janice?
So that's still the largest group because it's okay. Changing. So 21 votes. And then the rest, the second runner-up with 4. So not applicable, or I did an environmental, social, and governance audit in 2020.
Oh, super. Okay. So I would expect there to be a lot of different answers to this question, because there are a lot of different categories for ESG. Here's just a partial list of topics that are covered under environmental and social and governance. So if you're an internal audit trying to do a risk assessment, focus resources, when you look at all this and more, where do you start? Well, I'm going to start by giving you a tour of a few issues, 3 in environmental to begin with. And 1, it's hard to throw a quarter or pick up a newspaper and not see something about climate change. So we'll start with climate change. It's just a fact that the Earth is warming. That's just fact. If you look at the graph on the left there, that's the observed temperature, and there's some differences between natural causes and man-made causes. There's a little green line down there at the bottom that's partially obscured by that other map that is attributable to natural causes. And the delta there, the difference, is attributable to man-made causes, largely consumption of fossil fuels and the emissions that come in the form of carbon dioxide and related materials. The other 2 graphs show the change in temperature over a certain period of time, and all the trends are to get warmer. CO2 emissions are a large part of this. If you see the 2 graphs there, the one on the top shows the total emissions, and the rest of the world is the biggest, with China second and US third. The bottom graph shows the per capita CO2 emissions, and the US is by far the largest emitter per person in the world. The trends are in the right direction, but we're still just about double anywhere else in the world in terms of contributing to global warming per capita. Climate change has many effects. One of the effects that we have seen here experienced in California is wildfires. There are a couple screenshots here of wildfires in a certain time over the Western US. We haven't seen much in the news here, but there have been wildfires all over Alaska. Of course, there have been wildfires in Australia we've read about. The map in the bottom right is a little different. That's Indonesia, with fires in Indonesia. That's kind of a double whammy because it's the tropics. You would not expect the tropics to be on fire, but man-made fires are set in Indonesia to clear tree canopy for palm oil plantations. And it's often the case that those fires get out of control and they burn other trees unintentionally. This removes tree canopy, which is a very important part of our Earth's lungs, and it contributes to climate change as well. There are other effects of climate change, including the ones shown here. There are changes in habitat on land and water. There's changes in where fish migrate, where whales appear, where porpoises, where the dolphins appear. All those habitats are changing because of the acidity of the ocean and the temperature of the ocean. And if you think you can escape climate change risk, you really can't. It's really just a matter of what risk pertains to your particular area. In the US, this map shows the most likely climate change risk where you are in the country, including sea level rise. One of the things that happens in sea level rise, if you look down there in Florida and the Carolina, the oceans are getting warmer. Warm water takes up more volume than cold water. And as the sea level rises, salt water intrudes through sandy soil. And in places where they extract groundwater for drinking water or agriculture, that water becomes saline and it's unusable. So there are a lot of secondary implications for climate change, including the ones that are shown here. The response to this kind of issue is often a law or regulation. The Paris Climate Accord, we've all heard about, that's the most recent one, but there have been some others in the past, in Copenhagen, Kyoto, and Montreal. There are over 1,200 policies in 164 countries on that. The regulations that come out of that largely go to limiting emissions due to combustion from vehicles, from energy, and the way energy is used in everything from appliances to buildings. And when companies recognize that something is a risk and catching the public eye and important to how they're perceived and how they perform, it's often the case, and it's become standard, that companies will make commitments on ESG issues that are important. About a quarter of the global Fortune 500 companies have made commitments to be carbon neutral by 2030. That is, whatever their activities are, they'll reduce those emissions to zero, or they will offset those emissions some other way. I call your attention to the two at the bottom of the screen. Walmart has an initiative to avoid 1 gigaton of greenhouse gas emissions from their value chain. This indicates one way that companies are getting involved, not just by doing things within their own control, but by doing things, implementing programs that challenge their suppliers to come on board and to follow the same values. Trane Technologies is a company in the air conditioning and heating business, and on their website, they say that they're going to help reduce customers' carbon emissions by 1 gigaton by 2030. So it's not hard to figure out from those two things that Trane Technologies wants to be in the supply chain of Walmart. And one of the things that will show up sooner or later, if it's not there already, in a contract to do business with Walmart as a supplier is to give them information on to reduce climate change. That will show up and that will become a condition of doing business with Walmart. And it might not be in the Federal Register, but if it's in a contract you've signed with the customer, in my book, that's called compliance. So now that we've had a quick tour of climate change, let's do the next polling question and ask people to say, where does ESG live in your organization? So there are a lot of different functions here. I can see the polling coming in. We see a lot of folks say compliance. That's encouraging. A few people say environmental. We have a lot of colorful responses in these bars, just like we were told to do. Marketing takes up a big share, it looks like. So really, it's kind of all over the place. And that's not surprising. I've found that ESG, if it lives anywhere, it may live in multiple places, that the roles, the responsibilities, the activities, the systems for collecting data and information are widely distributed throughout the organization. And internal auditors will recognize that as maybe a red flag in terms of how all this stuff comes together. We're going to move on to another environmental topic, one that really went mainstream. We had a presentation earlier about movie references. Well, here's one from The Graduate. I want to say one thing to you, just one word, plastics. So this movie helped me, Dustin Hoffman, a household name. And true to form, on the chart here, you can see what plastics production has done over the last few decades. The number there on the left is not far off of 1967, and this is the vertical axis there does start at 0. It's not one of those that starts at 900,000 and the rest is just incremental. That is actual increase in production of plastics over time, and you can see that it has only gone up. Plastics are very convenient for containers, for throwaways, for cans, for car upholstery, the shopping bags that we have become accustomed to. But one of the problems is, well, where does plastic go? A lot of it winds up in storm drains. Anything that's litter in our neighborhood in Southern California winds up going in the storm drain and directly to the river. The boom there on the right, the city of LA and the governments try to catch trash before it goes to the ocean. But in rainfall events especially, and sometimes just naturally, it winds up on our beaches. And that picture there is actually from Santa Monica Beach. And even worse, the whole world really considers the oceans to be a giant dump. Plastics go into the ocean, and on the top left is a picture of the Pacific garbage patch. This is just what you can see from the surface. The plastic goes underneath very deep. Much of the plastic is in fine particles, so it's not even visible from satellite photos or from aerial flyovers. You really have to sample it. And the estimates are that the Pacific garbage patch takes up a size about the size of Texas. Some estimates are that it's the size of Russia. And we've all seen a river or a brook where the water flowing turns into a little eddy and stuff just collects there. Well, that's what happens with the ocean currents and how the plastics collect here and waste. And there's not just one, but there are 5 in the world, shown by the map on the bottom, and it's estimated that there are over 5 trillion pieces of plastic currently in the ocean. And once it gets into the ocean, it doesn't always stay in the patches, it winds up other places. There's a gentleman in the Philippines there trying to sort through what has washed up on the shore to collect recyclables to make some money. We had debris in California coast from the earthquake in Japan a few years back. And because plastics really does not degrade well, we see the kind of tragedy there in the upper right with that turtle. The bottom right is in a different beach. It was having an experience of turtles and marine life coming up on the shoreline, disoriented and dying. That is plastic removed from the stomach of one turtle that died from the eating all of this plastic. Just a couple years ago, an explorer decided to go to the deepest parts of every ocean around the planet. When he went to the bottom of the Mariana Trench, the lowest point on Earth, over 35,000 feet below sea level, he found a plastic bag. So this is really what happens to plastic. Plastic drinking straws are one thing that we hear and see a lot about. From the store, they look so nice. They're so convenient to use for a few minutes when you're drinking your beverage, but they wind up on the beaches. And there are about 4 billion of these manufactured per year. So one box doesn't look like much, but they add up. And when there is a problem, the response is often a regulatory requirement. These are occurring often at a city and state level, but there have been activities by companies to commit to remove plastic straws from their offerings. So plastics, since the 1960s, the two gentlemen on the left have aged remarkably well, I would say. But the plastics on the right have really not aged at all. Whereas paper and cardboard will degrade in somewhere between 1 to 6 months, the range of degradation time for plastics is often quoted as somewhere between 10 and 300 years, depending upon the plastic itself and where it is. It's been written that almost every pound of plastic that's ever been made still exists in the world today. And we keep making more and more of it. We keep using it for single-use plastics, and we keep throwing it away. So this is becoming a problem. And as a response, there are many regulations that cover single-use plastics in particular. We saw the straws a minute ago. Here are some regulations as they impact plastic bags. And besides the regulations, companies are stepping up and making commitments, and they are reporting on what they're doing. The first two bullets, I think, are very interesting. It would be hard to find a company that is more conscious of their brands than Coca-Cola. In many years, I've seen reports that Coca-Cola is the most valuable brand on the planet. Maybe it's Apple today, but Coca-Cola has had a very strong run. And they have announced that they're going to collect and recycle the equivalent of every bottle or can they sell globally by 2030. And within the last month or two, they have announced the change in Sprite bottles from green to clear. So because green bottles are difficult to recycle. Now the iconic green bottle on Sprite is part of their brand. And Coca-Cola is changing their brand because they recognize this is an issue and they have a part to play in ESG issues that go beyond their company. The other companies there have all made commitments. The commitments are different. They're different issues. They're different metrics. They're different goals. They're all appropriate to the company. They are voluntary commitments, but once these commitments are made, stakeholders expect them to live up to these commitments. Their customers expect them to live up to these commitments. Their employees expect them to live up to these commitments. So these commitments may be ambitious, but they are not to be taken lightly. And if these commitments come from a marketing department with no resources behind them, and no intention to commit them, greenwash will catch up to them, and they'll see through this, and this can turn into a risk. It's both an opportunity and it's a risk. A few years back, you might remember these microbeads that came into face wash and body wash. Makes you feel so clean, makes you feel so fresh. All you have to do is wash it on, wash it off. Well, what happens to microbeads? They're micro for a reason. They're typically less than 1 millimeter in diameter. The net that we saw at the end of the LA River stands no chance of catching something 1 millimeter in diameter. So these go directly through to the ocean. And these are particularly prone to enter the food chain. Fish eat these, whales eat fish eat other fish, and they wind up in the food chain, including back onto some of our dinner tables. So another thing that microbeads do, because they are so small, they affect the opacity of the oceans, and fish that are accustomed to being able to see, to swim, become confused. And that's another way that we are altering the habitat in the oceans. So the response here has been laws and regulations, not worldwide, but many, many countries. Some states have banned these in their entirety. Some states allow for biodegradable alternatives, but not all. So what we see here is, what we see in many ESG topics, is an issue is recognized as a problem. It's recognized as a risk to the environment and a risk to human health. That turns into laws and regulations, and it also turns into opportunities. Burt's Bees and St. Ives saw the issue. They got ahead of this and got out of microbeads and put in biodegradable opportunities. Now they're prohibited someplace, but they carved out a niche from this issue and turned it into a business opportunity. A third topic I'll discuss for a minute is PFAS. These are per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, or PFAS. They're a class of 4,000 substances, chemicals that are highly resistant to water. They are persistent in the environment, and they're known as a forever chemical. Teflon is a PFAS, Scotchgard is a PFAS, and they have a lot of uses that we have come to really enjoy in our everyday life. If you spill some water, spill some juice on the carpet, you can wipe it off. If you spill it on the sofa, you can wipe it off. If you cook with Teflon, if you spray something on your shoes and you drop something on a suede shoe, or you get caught in a rainstorm, it comes off. So there are a lot of ways that PFAS is really highly effective. It's been used for years in firefighting foam. It has some good properties there. So what happens to PFAS when it's used? It does scratch. It's been used in apparel. Apparel gets discarded. PFAS has a way of accumulating in the environment. It's a forever chemical. It does not degrade. All the studies have shown that PFAS can cause damage to liver, immune systems, thyroid. It accumulates in body tissue and in blood. It's not removed from the body, and it can cause that harm at very low levels. It was detected in the Great Lakes as early as 2003. Some of the companies have voluntarily phased out production of PFAS. But what they did instead was substitute some of the other 4,000 chemicals in there with shorter chains, and they're smaller chemicals. Those chemicals are nearly as persistent in the environment, and they also happen to migrate faster and migrate further. So not sure that that has really solved the problem. There, as of just 2 months ago, there are some 2,300 locations in 49 US states that have PFAS contamination in drinking water. And here's a map showing water supplies that are affected by PFAS. You see a lot in the Carolinas, a lot up east, a lot in Michigan. Some of the East Coast locations is where this has been manufactured. There's a lot of locations around Army bases and fire training centers because it was used liberally in firefighting foam, in burn pits, which are permeable and went right to the groundwater. And some of the studies indicate that there's so many dots in Michigan because they test for it. And there's some blank spaces here on the map because they don't test for it. So this is only reflecting the data that is known. Unless you feel left out here in Southern California, if you blow up the map here with the source that's, I think, shown here or is available, there are many places in Southern California with this problem as well. So California is the first state to require testing of drinking water. Every year, you probably get a notice in the mail that I hope you'll look at next time on all the results of testing in drinking water. Pfast will be one of the chemicals. There's now formal rulemaking under place for carpets, rugs, and how it can be used in different products. Some substitutions that we may have to do for different products. The exposure limits in food. And even this was going on even in the last administration and this administration. So this has survived all the political changes over the last few years because it is an important and evolving topic. There were concerns for a while that PFAS was showing up in chocolate cake, and it turned out that data was suspect and an anomaly. So if there's one good piece of news out of this, it's that chocolate cake is safe. So you only have to worry about that adding to our COVID-10 and not for it causing diseases due to PFAS. So besides the laws and regulations, where are the company commitments for this? You really can't see them. That's because PFAS is really occurs business to business. Companies manufacture it. They put it in products in their supply chain. They sell it. They use it as a component for something they sell to somebody else. That door frame upholstery we saw a couple slides ago. There's many, many companies go into making that door frame and the upholstery on the side of your car. So the commitments that are arising here are between businesses, and you don't see what those commitments are. When it comes to doing a compliance register or a risk register for purposes of considering risk on auditing or to business or to the operations itself, you don't find it in the Federal Register, and you don't find it in the legal code. They're buried in any number of contracts with business partners, with commitments the company has made, and in commitments to customers if you're in this line of business. So I put this out here to illustrate the different ways that these commitments can arise. So we've just covered 3 of hundreds of topics on environmental. So what matters really? Well, that depends upon where you sit. These 3 issues I picked intentionally because they're universally applicable, like climate change, plastics, widely applicable, PFAS, a lot more sort of laser focused into some industries. So it's kind of a mama bear, papa bear, baby bear kind of thing that some of these issues will apply to your organization and some may not. And we hear the term materiality all the time, and in the ESG world, it comes up a lot. In my view, materiality depends upon where you sit. If you consider, let's say, a grocery chain or a store chain that has 100 locations, and there's only one place where they have a charbroiler in the restaurant that pumps emissions out the top of the store in a stack. Well, 1 out of 100 is not material from an accounting perspective, and that would not rise to the top very much. If the exhaust stack is next to the intake of the building next door, and you're the owner, manager of that building, and you're getting calls and complaints from the occupants of the building, the doctor's offices in the building, the accounting firms in the building, the clinics in the building, it's material to you. So ESG is one of those things, the materiality concept comes up, but you can take some lessons from accounting and our traditional auditing, but you really have to look through it through a different lens to understand the risk to the business, because those risks accrue in so many different ways that go beyond the financial, which is why I like to call this non-financial reporting when we talk about the reporting of these issues. So as we bring the environmental issue to a close, let's do another polling question, shall we? To see how many internal audits of ESG topics, I think we have one answer already and a clue, has your organization done in the last 5 years? Let's give people a few minutes. And I'm looking now, you can continue to vote. It looks like the most popular answer is none, followed closely by we don't know or maybe not applicable. But 7% of the respondents have done 5 or more. So I would say these are among the industry leaders in putting it into the audit plan and actually doing the audits of it just about once a year. The total responses are that over 1 in 5 have done at least one audit of ESG. So I hope when we come back and do this at next year's conference, these results will look much different. So here we go. Let's move right on. We'll spend a few minutes on a really an issue that'll really break your heart. The one social issue is modern day slavery and human trafficking. And in my view, it's a real shame we have to be talking about this today, but it is an issue that exists in our world. It's estimated that $127 billion in garments imported to the G20 have forced labor in the supply chain. You heard about this issue, and I'm sure a few years back when a factory collapsed in Bangladesh, the Rana factory collapsed, and hundreds of people lost their lives, and many big name apparel companies had their supply chain included folks in that building. So that brought it to light, and many of the big companies are now doing more about it. But it is estimated by the Global Slavery Index that there are over 40 million people in the apparel industry in essentially modern slavery. And the majority of those, about 80% of them, are female, and many of them are also children. The fishing industry is another industry where forced labor is widespread. It's problematic in Southeast Asia. The gentleman in the upper left picture there is likely someone from Thailand, India, Cambodia, has left his village looking to improve the lot of life for his family. He's been promised a high-paying job on a fishing boat. He's paid a fee for this finding this job. He gets on the fishing boat, he surrenders his passport and ID, and out to sea they go. When they come in with the catch, they don't go to the dock on the shore, they stop offshore. The catch is offloaded and goes to the shore, and without setting foot on ground, back out to sea they go. And this process repeats itself for weeks or months. The fisherman is not paid or is paid very nominally, so he cannot work off his debt. And if anybody complains, then over the side they go. There are a disturbing number of people go missing or confirmed dead from India, Thailand, and Southeastern Asia in the fishing industry. And this is unfortunately widespread. The young man on the right is in Africa, out there catching fish for not just his family, but as part of a commercial operation. You can imagine what he's being paid or not paid. And supply chains being as deep as they are and as opaque as they are, Much of this fish winds up on food in our restaurants, in our tables, and in our stores. And this is where some of it comes from. The cocoa industry is another industry with children, especially in the supply chain. There's estimates of over 2 million children in West Africa working on cocoa farms, likely for little or no pay. This source is the outline.com. There are many groups who track this kind of issue through NGOs. The construction materials business is not immune from this. And supply chains being what this are, it could be that the pavers in your driveway or in your neighborhood have got their courtesy of some of the folks in these pictures, or people who have obtained these materials just like that. Conflict minerals hit the news a few years back. It was called to the attention of the regulators that many big name tech companies were highly profitable off of devices that included tin, tantalum, tungsten, or gold. That was much of it coming from mines in countries like we see here. The Democratic Republic of Congo is a source of a couple of these minerals. And with the insurrections and civil strife there, that originated in conflict zones. And it just didn't seem right to many stakeholders that these companies should profit off of this without being required to do something about it. So tucked into the Dodd-Frank Act, which helped pull us out of the, was a response to some other financial irregularities, was a provision called Section 1502 for conflict minerals. It required companies to look into their supply chain if they manufacture products that contain any of these 4 minerals. And you have to do filings to the SEC every year. And it's possible to do external assurance of that to go with those reports. As my bio mentioned, I've done and led some of those. So I've signed assurance reports myself that are on file at the SEC for conflict minerals. The EU also has conflict minerals laws. They're a little bit different. They're changing at the moment, and they also may include cobalt. So even the definition of conflict minerals is in the process of changing. And on a broader basis, modern day slavery and human trafficking, there are some laws and regulations. The UK put into place a Modern Slavery Act back in 2015. Companies must evaluate their suppliers and publish an annual statement, which is public. Those statements started to appear, I believe it was in 2017. California passed a state law called the Transparency in Supply Chains Act. Large retailers who sell, let's say, fish in their groceries, and manufacturers must provide consumers with information on their efforts to eradicate slavery and human trafficking supply from their supply chains. And a link to that or some statement must be available on the company's homepage. If you go to, you'll see it if you look at websites for retailers that do business in California. The threshold for both of these is very low. And if any company thinks they can just avoid this issue by moving or looking the other way, the fact that supply chains are deep and companies and activity and commerce in general is global has found its way into these laws and regulations. The conflict minerals goes very far back into the supply chain. The criteria for being subject to the Modern Slavery Act in the UK is doing about $50 million worth of business in the UK, regardless of where you're headquartered, what your revenues are worldwide. If you do, I think it's 36 million pounds, approximately $50 million of business in the UK, you are subject to the Act. And the report that you submit does not only cover your activities in the UK, it covers your entire company. Similarly, the California law, the criteria there is $100 million of global receipts. And if you do any business in California, let's say $100, and your global receipts are more than 100, you are subject to this law. So if you move a corporate headquarters, if you move an office, and anybody in California buys your product, you're in. The enforcement here is from the Attorney General, and they have brought some suits that are in the works, and a few have been settled. Here's when the law went in UK, companies started submitting their reports. KnowTheChain.org is an NGO that tracks such things, and they started analyzing the reports, scoring the reports. You see a list of companies here on the left who they rated very highly, and you see a list of companies on the right who are rated very low, and it's a very stark contrast. So anytime you publish anything or submit anything, whether it's voluntary or regulatory required, anything that's public is fair game for analysis and rating and ranking. And these analyses are used by a broad group of stakeholders. If you recall, our first polling question allowed you to pick your own criteria for the most important ESG issue to you. So people looking at these companies could be making decisions about where I want to buy some stock for my retirement plan. They could be deciding where I want to tell my investment manager, let's say Vanguard or Fidelity, I want you to go after this company because I'm disturbed about human trafficking in a supply chain. You could be a young, talented person coming out of college or trying to grow a career in internal audit and deciding what company aligns with my personal values. So I'm not so keen about working at these companies on the right, but I'm going to take my talent to the companies on the left. Or you could even look at this and decide, you know what, I'm not going to eat at that restaurant anymore for dinner because I don't like where they sit on this list. So I'm not going to buy this product. I'm not going to patronize this company. So, and this is one issue of many, many issues that are out there. So ESG is affecting companies in a lot of different ways, and there are a lot of different entities that are in what is becoming known as the ESG ecosystem for evaluating company performance. So with that, let's move on to the next polling question. Here we go.
So Doug, let us know if you have a couple moments to answer questions, and we have about 5 minutes.
Okay.
But very eye-opening information, a little bit sad, actually a lot sad.
Yeah.
But we're in a position to make change, so.
We are.
That's good.
If we have 5 minutes, you know what, I'm going to just zip right through. Maybe we'll have one left for questions. 1 minute. Let's get back to my screen here. So investors, few people influence this more than people with money. Larry Fink last year caused a bit of a storm by coming out and saying, we are watching this issue. We expect to make more offerings. You should disclose in line with the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board. And if your management isn't making progress, we're not going to vote for you. And in the pandemic, and contrary to expectations, things doubled down and things went faster. The inflow into sustainability fund doubled over the prior year. There will be a transition to a zero carbon economy. We asked companies to disclose to these standards, and the increase has been almost over threefold. And contrary to just being a cost, all the data points to there being a sustainability premium. If you do this right, there's value. So here's kind of a traditional way that we look at risk. It's kind of a linear chain on how things arise. That's really not the case anymore with impositions by stakeholders and expectations from company requirements. And here's a model I think is really the better model today. that the companies in the middle and were being influenced by stakeholders, supply chain and value chain and customers. And we all like that really smooth cart at the store when we go to the grocery. Once in a while you get one with a chunk out of a wheel and it goes clunk, 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 clunk as you go around the store, and people look at you and you go, it's not me, it's the cart. Well, if there's chunks out of 4 wheels or there's 4 chunks out of a wheel, you just give up and you get another cart. And if the store doesn't maintain their carts, you give up and you go to another store. Well, in my model, if you're not paying attention to some of these issues and you get chunks out of it, like you're on the right side of that listing on too many issues, people give up and they get another company. They get another company as an investment or a job or a customer. So the requirements are there, they're evolving, and I think you really ought to pay attention to them. Here's some tips here. I went back over presentations from the last 5-6 years, and I would say almost every tip would still be valid today. But internal audit, you really have to know what this issue is. You have to track it and put it in your plan every year. We do a lot for internal controls over financial reporting. There's a lot to be said about doing internal controls over non-financial reporting. And because ESG lives in so many places in the organization, the controls are highly disaggregated, and many of them are, let's just say, informal. So here's a place where internal audit can add a lot of value, and keep your fraud hat on. When the controls are weak, when there's incentive to meet the demands of Mr. Larry Fink and the investment community, and the rationalization is, well, it's not financial, you're going to see fraud. And the opportunity is certainly there. So that's it for this presentation. Janice, I'll let you